on this computer. So we want to thank everybody for attending today. We're going to go ahead and we have a poll that we kind of shared. So we have that up right now. It has that about 90% of everybody that's been on right now has either planted flowers in a pot or grown vegetables. And I'm going to go ahead and stop. Go ahead and take that down. And then Diane, you can get started. Thank you.
Okay, I've got my screen sharing and hopefully everybody can see the first slide. Okay, and with the poll results, I think we're like 90% of the way there. Everybody's grown vegetables and they've grown in containers. So, you're ready. I'm Diane Langenhorst. I'm a master gardener since 2017. I've been growing vegetables for 45 years, but 40 of those years were up in the Chicago area. So I'm still learning a lot about growing vegetables in Southern Illinois. Today, we're going to do an overview about using raised beds and containers to grow your favorite vegetables. And this is a great way to expand your current garden or to start a garden. We got 20 minutes for the presentation, and then at the end, we'll take questions. And we have Gordon Worth and Nancy Johnston and Sarah Lee are our panel, and they're gonna help with answering questions. One of the advantages of raised beds and containers is that they address a lot of the disadvantages of growing in-ground gardens. They can address if you have poor drainage, if you have clay soil like we do. If you're just ready to go out and start gardening, your raised beds will dry sooner, and certainly with your containers, you can start sooner. You're not working at ground level, which is, if you are doing in-ground gardening, you know what I'm talking about. You're working at ground level, and your knees may not like that anymore. In-ground gardens can get compacted from foot traffic. And of course, they have a variety of weed seeds and grasses in them that you're always fighting. Hence the need for raised beds and containers. And the benefits are numerous. The soil will stay loose. You start with an amended soil and it doesn't get compacted by foot traffic. So it's real easy to work in raised beds. The soil warms up earlier in the spring. So like I mentioned, you don't have to wait to start. Certainly you get higher yields. You can plant closer, and on a per square foot basis, you don't have to leave footpath in your garden. And obviously it's easier on your back, like I mentioned, and it requires less weeding, which is also easier on your back. And like I mentioned earlier, you can avoid the poor or the contaminated soils, and you get better air movement and drainage, which means you're going to get fewer pests. And for our purposes today, when I talk about raised beds, I'm talking about not just in the ground raised beds, but like the picture here where you see the raised bed on legs. And containers are really growing mediums that you can move. So for our purposes today, raised beds don't move, containers you can move around. And containers, because you can move them, you can move them from sun to shade depending on your plant's needs. And this can be helpful with germination. It can helpful when it gets real hot. And when you're going on vacation, it's a great way to reduce your watering needs. So let's talk about building a raised bed. Raised beds only need sides, as you can see from that top picture. Or if it's raised off the ground, you're obviously going to need a bottom. Just make sure you have holes for drainage. And in terms of size, 12 inches on the side of your raised bed will give you a good soil depth for most vegetables. But a raised bed can be as low as the 6 inches, which you can see from the bottom picture. The width, 4 feet across, is a great width because it allows you to reach across. If your raised bed is up against a fence or a wall, then you probably only want to make it 2.5 feet wide, so you can reach in there without stepping in your garden. And for length, 12 feet if you're using wood, because if you get anything longer than that, your wood is likely to warp. And it really depends how thick your wood is. You may see some of the purchase packages where you can buy a raised bed, and they'll give you a configuration for 2 4-foot square or 1 4x12 foot. But those have connectors every 4 feet to prevent that warping. There's lots of raised bed material options, but certainly wood is the most common. If you're using treated wood, make sure it's non-arsenic treated lumber. And there's a tag, and you can see in the upper right, it shows one of the tags, and it shows, that tag will show if it's environmentally preferable treated wood process, to let you know if it is. Treated wood is, they discontinued the arsenic treated wood, so you just should be sure to use a heavy plastic liner if you're not sure about your treated wood. There's lots of untreated wood options that might deteriorate faster, except for cedar and redwood, which are just naturally rot resistant. As you can see at the bottom there, you could use concrete forms, you can use patio pavers to create a raised bed, and you can even use something like the metal tanks that you have, or that you might not have, but it looks like a great raised bed. Raised beds can also be just a pile of dirt or compost on a hard surface. And it will save on the material cost. You're not building a raised bed, but it will deteriorate quicker over time. You can put legs like the bottom left picture shows, and these are great for people who can't bend over, anybody in a wheelchair. You'll see beds like this often at the community links here and some of the senior facilities. And then these right 2 photos are examples of the many shapes and sizes that a raised bed can be. And they can either be purchased or you can make them yourself. Karen, does that raised bed look familiar? Anyway, you can use hoop houses with the raised beds. And because of the sides, it's easy to attach those hoop houses to extend your garden season. In this model, you can see they use the electrical metal tubing to make the frame, and then they use greenhouse plastic on the top. You could also use flexible PVC tubing. A 10-foot length will work well on a 4-foot bed, and then you can just screw in the clips on the side to hold the tubing in place when you're using it. You need to make sure you're using greenhouse plastic. There's a lot of varieties of greenhouse plastic with different weights and applications. You could get screening to use in the spring to keep the cabbage moths from laying their eggs on your cabbages, which is one of the worst problems you can get with cabbages. In the fall, you can use a cover with a semi-hardy plant to really extend your garden season. Okay, let's talk about vegetable garden. If you don't, drainage holes are the biggest thing you need to consider for your container. You can use any kind of a container, just make sure it has drainage. It's just like if you're growing houseplants, you need to have drainage. You want to have a proper soil mix. There is a soil-less mix that really usually contains a peat or a core, a COIR core. It's a coconut fiber, which is a much more sustainable material than peat and is becoming more frequently used. Potting soil could also be your soilless mix. Some of the potting soils are, but they're good options for planting in. You want to have a suitable sized container. If the pot is too small, your plant's going to become stressed because of the lack of space and watering. And if you're using a soilless mixture, you need to check whether nutrients have been added. If not, you want to add some fertilizer, like a slow release granular option, or you could use a liquid option. Just be sure to follow the directions to dilute it properly and the frequency of use. And then proper watering. If you put containers out in the full sun with vegetables, they're going to need to be watered every day, unless you're getting a lot of rain. And then as the plants grow, they almost act like umbrellas, so your water is not getting into the pot. So, and like all watering, but specifically for vegetables, be sure that when you're watering them, to water at the base, either using soaker hoses or hold your wand down there, and not just giving the plants a shower. Some container options, it's not just the large flower pots made of terracotta or ceramic or plastic. Your containers can be store-bought or they can be homemade. You can see here a picture of a 5-gallon bucket. You could even use something like a sink, as long as it has a hole in it. And at the bottom right there, you see the tires. And the EPA says that tires are safe to use for growing, as they only become toxic when they're burned or they're shredded. But I think that's kind of a preference item there. There's more examples here of containers. 5-gallon plastic drums that are cut in half are great large containers, and often readily available from some of the local farms. You can see the crates that are using liners to hold the soil, and you can see that your choices for containers are really unlimited. But just keep in mind that the smaller options require more watering. There's even straw bale gardening, and kudos go out to Deanna Rotterman. These are her straw bales, and she's had great success with it. When you're using straw bales, you can dig out part of the bale and add dirt, or if your plant is big enough, you can plant it directly. You just need to be sure to locate it near water, because straw bales dry out quicker. And herbs will do very well in straw bales, but you can see here, Deanna on the right, Deanna has squash, and then on the left, she's got potatoes. And again, you need to make sure enough fertilizer, enough water, but it's a great way to add some space to your vegetable gardens when you couldn't fit everything you wanted to grow in the space you have available. For your soil choices, raised beds want high percentage of organic matter. In your garden soils, if you just use garden soils, they can hold too much water. You can actually purchase raised bed soil mixes, but it may not be economical depending on the size and the number of raised beds that you want to do. In our experience, using topsoil with compost and peat moss has been successful. For containers, again, you want to choose that soilless mix with the coconut fiber. You want to make sure, though, that you've got nutrients in there if your soilless mix doesn't come with the fertilizer. And again, that's just a choice. It's more economical to buy it without, but it's certainly more convenient to buy like a Miracle Grow that already has the slow release granular fertilizer in there. And preparing a new garden. A quick and easy way of starting a new garden, especially a raised bed anywhere, is putting down cardboard or newspaper to smother the existing vegetation. And then you can just put on your soil on top, and it will kill the weeds and the grass that's under there. You want to make sure if you use newspaper, you've got it thick enough. You should have at least 6 sheets thick. And you want to make sure that everything overlaps, because you don't want your weeds or your grass creeping up between it. But we have used this in our own beds and at the new butterfly garden in Bartelzo, and it's worked very well for just starting a new bed out in the grass. Location, it cannot be emphasized enough. The success of your garden is going to depend on it. For sunlight, in the next slide, we'll talk more about light, but you have to have a sunny enough location. You want to have your water supply close by for your ease of watering. You really don't want to be hauling water across your yard. You want easy access for when it's time to harvest. And just in terms of keeping an eye on the garden, you don't want it out of sight. You want to keep it somewhere nearby. And you want to have sufficient space. And you can make up for space sometimes just by using containers where you can slip anywhere if you don't have a broad enough expanse in your yard for a raised bed. And for sunlight, vegetables like full sun, which is 6 or more hours a day of sunlight. Vegetables are really sensitive to how much light they get, most of them. There's a few that are listed here that can take the dappled sunlight, and they're usually your leafy greens, like your chard, your kale, any of your salad greens. And the same for herbs. Most of your herbs will require full sun. There's a few like parsley and others that will tolerate the dappled sunlight. And I encourage you to grow herbs, even if you're not using them for cooking, because they provide food for beneficial insects and pollinators. But if your veggie containers are in part sun, there's just a few things you should consider. They don't need as much water as your containers that are out in the full sun. This is really an advantage if you're going on vacation. And with the containers, if they're not already in a shady spot, you can move them into a shady spot, so they'll require less water while you're gone. If it gets above 90 degrees, by all means, move your containers into the shade if you can. Also, you're going to have slower growth. It could be 15 to 25% more days to maturity if you're growing vegetables in a part sun location. Also, it takes longer to germinate in these shady locations, and you might want to think about transplanting seedlings, especially for some of the slower growing vegetables. And then look at your nearby structures. If it's a tree, there's nothing you can do, but if it's a fence or if it's a wall, consider whether you could paint it white so it would reflect more light onto your containers. So let's talk about what to grow. You should grow whatever you and your family will eat. It's real easy to get overwhelmed with your choices. Really start with your favorites. And for raised beds, almost any vegetable will work. Certainly tomatoes, peppers, beans. Your root crops do well in your raised beds, like radishes, carrots, beets, because you've got that looser soil, and you'll have much better results with root crops. Up in Chicago, given the clay soil we had in the yard, we never even thought about growing root crops. Herbs, especially your annuals like basil and parsley, those are great to stick in your raised beds. And then your leafy greens, your lettuce, your kale, your Swiss chard, it will do well anywhere. For your containers, Besides the leafy greens, if you're going to grow tomatoes, just check out the variety that you're growing. Consider the bush or patio type tomatoes. They are bred for growing in containers. If you're doing a root crop, just make sure it's deep enough for the root crop that you're growing. And again, herbs do very well in containers. However, there are certain things that have space issues and may not do as well in raised beds and containers. First of all, your corn. Your corn is a wind pollinated plant, so you need a square block, like a minimum of a 4x4 square of corn to really get the wind pollination to work, regardless of which way the wind is blowing. The other thing you might want to think about is not putting your melons, your butternut squash, and certainly not your pumpkins in your raised bed. In one of the community gardens, we did one year put pumpkins, which really took over the whole corner of not only the raised bed, but then the aisle and onto the fence. So if you've grown pumpkins, you know what I'm talking about. Now, there is just a wealth of great gardening information out there, but particularly on the extension site. And if you can see here, if you look across the top where it says our programs, started our programs, and then on the left is the list of them, go to horticulture. It also happens to be in the first row here of the thumbnails. And then under horticulture, choose fruit and vegetables. And then at the bottom of the fruits and vegetables page, there's a list of more resources. And if you click on the Illinois Vegetable Gardening Guide, you'll get to this page that has all of these extra resources for you to use. And number 3 is one of my favorites. It's tips on growing specific vegetables. And it will tell you which varieties are recommended. It'll tell you their growing time. It'll tell you how to space them in the garden, how far apart the plants should be, how far apart the rows should be, how deep you should put the seeds in. So it is a great resource to have. The second thing is the second URL down there, the search.extension.org. If you're looking for research-based information, and I know Master Gardeners always look for that, that is a great place. That's a search engine that will search all of the extension websites across the country. And you can put in looking for any kind of information. It's just a great resource to have. I want to give credit here to Nancy Creeth. She's the one who put together the original presentation for the Speakers Bureau on vegetable gardening in raised beds and containers. I've added a little, subtracted a lot, and that takes us just about to our 20 minutes, and we'll open it up for questions. Chris, if you will, hopefully you've been keeping an eye on the chat and see if people have put questions in.
Yes, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute for our panel. And then one of the questions is, can I use railroad ties?
Okay, does the panel want to take it? I have an answer.
I have an answer also.
I was saying no.
We all have an answer to that one.
I
Not a
think
good
the
idea.
sheet goes with creosote.
Yeah.
So
The only way you can use railroad ties is if you line it. You have to put a plastic between the railroad tie and the dirt.
Mhm.
I was going to say, and I agree with that, but the original material that came with this presentation said if they were old enough, that it wasn't an issue. And that surprised me because my reaction was exactly your reaction. Maybe not the first thing you want to use.
No, and half the time, if they're older, they're about rotted anyway. So you're starting out with wood that's almost gone. So yeah, I wouldn't. I mean, you can use them, but either wrap them in plastic or line the bed in plastic.
And I have a problem with that. from the plastic deteriorating after a few years.
Well, depending upon, there's also actually landscape
Landscape,
plastic, which is,
yeah, fabric.
yeah,
But that breathes.
and that's what I'm
So-
talking about, is landscape. Yes. Yeah. I don't like to use railroad ties, period, in the garden.
Like grocery lists.
Okay, the next question that we
Sometimes
had
eat it.
was, how about using pallets? What is your suggestion if you use pallets to do your raised beds?
I made a layer.
Actually, I've seen some things online on how to use your pallets. You just want to make sure they're not treated. Some pallets used to be treated. The new ones, they say, tend not to be.
There are actually codes on the pallets that tell you
Right.
how they're treated or not treated, and you have to know the codes, and I don't have those right off. But you can actually find online where it will tell you the code for the ones that are not treated with like a pesticide or preservatives. So you can use pallets, but you got to make sure you know where they came from.
Okay, I have one more question that was on there. What vegetable would you recommend for growing in a raised bed? Sarah, do you have any suggestions for that one?
Well, I think the tomatoes are a good idea. The problem that you might run into, as she mentioned, with some of these is that, well, for instance, corn, which we weren't going to probably use anyway, but those roots go really deep. So you have to think about how deep your roots need to go. So the bush tomatoes that she mentioned for the containers are a very good idea because they've got a more compact root system. So in your raised beds, you just need to think about that, because if you have a deep rooted type of plant, then those roots won't have any choice but to just go kind of along the bottom of it, if it has a bottom, or else they'll move down into the soil there if you've got it on the ground. But with roots, the watering is going to be a big issue, and of course your soil medium is going to make a difference. But I think the tomatoes are a good idea. I would think beans, peas, anything like that, just so you can keep the water on them.
Okay, I was looking, that was the last of our, does anyone else that's online have any questions for our panel? Dan is there any specific soil to be used in a raised bed? Gordon, do you have an answer for that?
Well, I think, like Diana said, the soilless mixtures are a good start if you can afford it. A lot of people, or if you go to the extension, I believe it shows you some of the things you can mix together, and so you can buy, 40 pounds of like a soilless mixture, and then maybe mix in a little bit of peat, and then maybe mix in, some perlite or vermiculite, and kind of make your own mixes. I know that's less more economical. One of the things I do is I usually try to mix in some of my compost. And a lot of times I'll start my bed with some of the compost material. And then use the bag material that I want to purchase on the top and kind of mix it together.
So
it depends on how big your bed is.
I was going to help a little bit with the proportions on making your own mix, if you'd like.
Good, thank you.
So any of you who have ever read the book or tried to follow some of the system on the square foot gardening, the recommendation for that is you're using 1/3 peat moss, 1/3 perlite, and then 1/3 compost. And the peat moss can be the peat moss even that you can buy at a discount store. But if ever you have the opportunity to go to a full service garden center to buy the long stranded peat moss, it's a little bit better as helping with drainage. Perlite is you look for a 4 cubic foot bag. You usually have to ask your special garden center to order that for you so they have it on hand. Some local garden centers do carry it. And then the compost, rather than adding just one kind of compost, if you have to buy your compost, you're best using they suggest 5 different kinds. So if you just go down your bag goods at your local garden center, and those 40-pound bags or 1 cubic foot bags, like the humus and cow manure, and even another brand of manure, any of those type of materials, 5 different bags if you don't have your own compost. And you mix those together. And an easy way to do that is to lay out a large tarp, put the materials on the center, and then fold over the corners back and forth so it rolls on top of each other. The only thing that I've done in the past with a group thinking, oh, we can just double that recipe. Don't try to turn too much at a time. It gets to be a workout. Otherwise, I hear people laughing because they've been with me.
Done that.
Been there, done that. But one person could do it if you do small batches. So those are just some recommendations.
Does anyone else have any questions for the panel?
It sounded like we started out with a very knowledgeable group. Does anybody have a favorite vegetable that they've grown in a container that's worked well?
All the lettuces do well in the raised beds. Any lettuce or kale or any of that. If you like to eat greens, the raised bed is ideal because you can plant them closer and harvest them quicker.
And something that wasn't touched on a lot at this point, but if you're doing a 4 foot wide by maybe 8 foot beds, I would not overlook using some vertical gardening techniques so you can avoid some of that sprawling out into the bed. Last year we tested using hog panels and having them, you buy the large one and they cut them in half at the store for you at the farm supply store, and using the green tea stakes to put them in. But you can grow any of your vining type vegetables up on that, and then getting more vegetables per square foot. And a favorite we had last year was those foot-long green beans. They work well on a trellis if you put one in your garden, and they produce tremendous amount. So it's really fun to watch them grow.
I have a question for the panel and for everybody. What is your favorite companion plant to put together? So if you have tomatoes in your raised bed, is there a favorite that you have as a companion?
I prefer marigolds, and I also prefer peppers. Tomatoes and peppers like each other, sweet peppers.
I've always put basil near the tomatoes because I read somewhere that they liked each other, but it's also a good combination for eating. Get your tomatoes, get your basil.
It's supposed to make them taste better, I think, the basil.
Do you guys, on your raised bed, do you recommend to have a soaker hose, or do you recommend to just to water by hand? What's your preference?
My preference is a soaker hose, especially under tomatoes, because you get such a splash that a lot of times you'll get bacteria on the lower leaves. If you're watering, it splashes up from the dirt and puts bacteria on your lower leaves. So the soaker hose usually when I plant my tomatoes, I put the soaker hose in with them. When I'm putting them in, I put it right on top and it's there whenever I get ready, if I need it or if I don't need it.
That's what I use as soaker hose. Different kinds. I've been
Yeah, I
experimenting
got it.
with different soaker hoses.
I do like the
then,
one that does the little droplets that comes out of, it looks kind of like a foam. I don't like the one that sprays the water because then you've got water splashing up on the lower leaves again, and that
Right.
seems to cause bacterial issues.
well, I've tried both. The one that they call the soaker hose, which is the hose that, just it all comes out everywhere, kind of, depending on how
Uh-huh.
much pressure you have on it. And then I've been trying the ones with that have the directed water
Mm-hmm.
coming out of that. That's the Rainbird is the brand I'm using, but
Oh yeah, I know Rainbird. Yeah, it's like a little spigot, and it sits in the ground, and you direct it right at the plant. Yeah, yeah.
that seems to be working pretty well.
Oh yeah, Rainbird's a nice one. It's a little more pricey.
Hmm.
I
Well, they
like
have
the-
offshoots of that. I love that brand, so there's some
Yeah.
less expensive ways to go.
Yeah, but the soaker hose works for me, so it's easier. I actually put it under my mulch a lot of times, so it's not even spraying up at all. I put down the soaker hose and then I put the mulch on top of it. So I mulch everything. My tomatoes are mulched, so I never have to touch them again once I put them in.
That's a great way to go.
Yeah, newspaper and mulch. Matter of fact, that's what I've been doing up until I started on this. Is I've been planting tomatoes and newspaper and mulch. That's what I've been doing all morning.
How many do you put in, Nancy?
I just put in 34.
Oh my
I
God.
put in a small
Wow.
garden.
So I know where to
smaller
come
garden.
get tomatoes this summer, right?
I put in a smaller garden this year. I promised to cut back, so I cut back.
I want to come see your garden.
Well, it's not done, and everything's not up because it's been so cold. I've been waiting to put the tomatoes in. They've been living in a box in my house because the weather's just been so goofy. But I decided today was the day. I was tired of looking at them, and they're getting too big, so they had to go in today. So
We could have a virtual field trip.
There you go.
sure.
Good idea, Sarah Lee.
Mhm. Well, that would be interesting. Just bring your weeders because I have weeds everywhere. I'm a weed person. I have them all around the outside. I mow a lot.
So is
So
it
you
better
know-
to transplant or to sow directly when you're doing a raised bed or a container? Have you guys found a preference on that?
Oh, it's better to transplant. Tomatoes in particular, tomatoes and peppers and stuff like that. You need to transplant those. Don't try to direct seed them in the beds. They just don't come quick enough.
Okay.
And the growing season's not long enough, but certainly putting in beans work well from seeds in a raised bed.
Yeah. And if you put a trellis up and you do pole beans, you really get production. You get a lot more production from a pole bean in a raised bed.
I've got a question on the fertilizer. You mentioned either a slow release or a liquid fertilizer. Do you have any recommendations as far as the nutrient content of those fertilizers?
Well, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Nancy.
Well, I'm an organic grower, so I don't like the chemical mixes. A lot of times I love the fish meal and fish oils. I use everything fish because a lot of it doesn't burn it for one thing. So you dilute it and just spray it underneath. It's a little more, you have to spray it more often, but to me, I prefer it over the powders and the chemicals, but that's just me.
How often do you apply those?
In the big growing season, it can be weekly depending on what's going on. Once a week or once every 2 weeks. Because the fish stuff is a lot less, it just isn't that strong.
Right.
So you can spray it not on the plant, on the dirt more often, and it doesn't burn the plants. That's why I like it. And it's a liquid, so you just mix it up in a pumper and just spray it on the ground. It doesn't really take that long. Even when you have 34 tomatoes, it doesn't take long if you've got it in a pumper. You just walk along and spray it. And it leaches down through the mulch. So when it rains, then it goes down in there and you're good to go. And the worms love it. I was just admiring my worms today when I was digging the holes for the plants. I'm like, look at the worms. I've got lots of worms. They love the newspaper.
Yeah, I was going to say they're probably after that newspaper.
They love the newspapers. Yes, they do.
So you've got a little vermicomposting going on there too.
More or less, yeah, in ground, of course, but yeah. But I have 5 compost going all the time, 5 composting bins at all times. And then when I need compost, I just pull it out of one of them.
So Gail, I've got a question for you. What is a hog panel?
Oh,
You're
Yeah,
talking
so
cattle
if you
panel?
There's
Yeah,
a hog panel and there's a cattle panel. There's both. One's taller
yeah,
than the other.
yeah, cattle panels really what they probably will price them at and show you. But if you go to a Tractor Supply or a Buckeyes, they usually have them out on the side of their building, and they're just laying flat, and they're 15, 16 feet long, and they're
16.
like, how far?
They're 16 foot long and 4 foot.
16. So, and you can buy them in 2 different heights, but they had the squares themselves are a welded heavy wire, and they're like 6 by 6 inch squares. So they've got a lot of openings, but there's lots of places for you to tie those. So when you go to one of those stores, they'll cut those in half for you. But if you have 8-foot beds, I have them cut them not just in half, but I don't want to have one of those 6-inch rods cut in half. I don't know if that's making sense. So imagine a square. I have them cut them twice. I have them cut them so that they're flush, and I don't have a piece of 3 inches of the previous square in there. So I'm actually cutting a whole square out. And then you just wire them or tie them to those T-posts, and it gives you a really good sturdy to grow anything. Actually, we grew our tomatoes on those, but you could just weave the tomatoes in and out. But you could grow anything on those that wants a trellis.
Yeah.
So yeah, I keep saying hog panel, but yeah, cattle panel, and they're about,
but it's shorter.
yeah, they're like $15, $16 each, but you have, well, they might even actually be closer to 20, but you have a very sturdy, forever, if you will, trellis.
Yeah. They last a lot. I mean, yeah, I use them every year. I have the same ones.
They don't rot or rust or anything. And then some people will take the 10-foot panel and they won't cut it. Of course, you have a problem getting it to you if you don't have a trailer. And they'll bend them over in an arch, and they'll tie them to 4x4 posts, and then they'll use it to grow some different kinds of beans or even flowering clematis, or make it as an entrance to your garden that's usable space to grow things on. So you have the option of using those for 2 different things. So Sarah, in Jefferson County, you just cruise by Tractor Supply there in the back, and you'll see them laying. There's usually a stack.
All right, that's gonna be my first order of business.
Yeah, and they do come in different grades. I prefer going with the heavier grade. You save only a couple dollars, and they will cut them for you. So don't go on a Saturday when they're super busy, because that kind of irritates them. But they will. They are part of their service. Will cut them. They've got the bolt cutters, and they come and cut them for you.
But don't forget the T-post.
Right.
You need something good to attach them to.
Right.
And each panel, if you're not connecting them, needs 3 posts, one in the middle and one on each end.
Right.
I put all my tomatoes on, so I actually put a T-post in between where they butt together. I put them together that way, and I just wire it with the number 9 wire.
So if you're
And
growing, yeah, and if you're growing in a raised bed, like some of the ones that Diane showed 4x8, you could put 2 panels in each one. We one time did 1 panel down the center, and that's not adequate. So because it's just too much foliage. So hey, you can run 2 panels in a raised bed, just closer to the edge where there's enough room for the plant, and you have a little space between those. So space them out.
So are you just, Nancy, are you just using that as a support for your tomatoes and then weaving your tomatoes out of it? You're not using it as a tower?
I had made towers like years ago out of rebar, the rebar wire that you put in concrete.
Okay.
And the problem I have is when the wind picks up, if the plant is really tall, it will pull the plant and all out of the ground. So I discovered that using these panels, I put one on each side of my tomato plants, and nothing blows them over. They're solid. I don't have to worry about it. It can blow all at once, and the plants stay up, you know, so I don't worry about it. I do use the towers on some of the stuff, the indeterminate tomatoes, the ones that get really tall and sprawly. I've kind of learned which ones those are. They get really big. And so I'll put a tower inside between the two panels. And then I'll actually wire the tower to the panels, and then it goes nowhere. You know, it's solid. I've had it grow all the way out the top and be 3 or 4 foot over the top of the panels.
Wow.
But they stay in there, and nothing pulls out, and nothing gets into them. And you can reach through, like she said, those holes are big, so you can reach through and get a tomato anywhere. It's not really a difficulty.
Nancy,
Yes, sir.
this is Larry Boyles. You can buy rebar. I use the same thing. You use reinforcement wire to make cages, and I buy a little rebar. I don't know, it's a 3/8 of an inch. It comes in 10-foot sections and cut it into 3. And
Yeah, I know what you're talking about, and make a like an anchor. I did before, but I'll tell you what, these panels are like, it's so easy. I mean, I just drive in the T-post and wire it to it, and it's solid all year long. I don't have to even look at it again.
Good.
Yeah. Of course, I kind of cheat. My brother has a little skid loader. He comes out and pulls them all up for me in the fall. When I'm clearing everything out, he just pulls all the posts out for me and we move it.
Yeah.
So I always do, keep moving everything. But yeah, I take advantage of the fact that he's got good equipment. But yeah, it works for me. Are we still on?
Yes.
Hello? Okay.
Yeah.
There's just a big silence. I didn't know if
Yeah, I don't see any other questions in the chat room. We appreciate you guys helping us out and being on our panel. Diane, thank you so much for putting the presentation together. Does anyone else have any other questions for anybody else on the panel, or anything you want to discuss?
No, I just want to thank everybody for coming, and we truly appreciate the panel for answering the questions. And Nancy, I want to see your garden.
I would like to make a final comment. So Diane, again, as everyone thanked you for that, keep in mind that this is part of the Speakers Bureau for those folks that are out there that are not master gardeners and want a presentation coming to your organization at some point. Or if you want to do one of these, she had to condense it quite a bit down. These are pretty extensive programs to be able to share with people. So as you're looking down in the fall and for next spring and whatnot for helping organizations do programs, these are available and they can be edited to be a shorter program if necessary. So talk to Diane. She'll let you know how easy it is to do. It takes a little time, but you can customize it for your client.
Yes, and we want to also remind everybody that may not be Master Gardener that's on today. Next month, we're going to do, our topic is Easy Care Native Plants on June the 9th at noon. And Sarah Lee, who is on our panel today, is kind of going to spearhead that one and give a presentation about the Easy Care Natives. And we appreciate everyone logging on today. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye.